Take Command, Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulson, and we are talking about the offensive structure now outside of just the individual brilliance of Jayden Daniels, the things that Cliff was trying to do. And man, there's some stuff in this game that's really, really beautiful, especially in the red zone. We'll get to that in a second. But one thing that I do think Cliff did a pretty good job of too is getting Terry involved at key moments in the game, leveraging his skill set. And I actually have a stat for you, Logan, that is truly mind-blowing. You ready for this?
Yeah, always ready.
If I were to just quiz you, say, hey, who in the league has the best quarterback rating when throwing to a receiver? So what wide receiver quarterback duo has the best quarterback rating this year? Who would you say?
I'd probably say Sam Darnold and
Justin Jefferson?
Yeah, Justin Jefferson.
That'd be a good guess. I would say, considering he's probably going to get the triple crown, my guess would have been Joe Burrow to Jamar Chase.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
That's incorrect. It's Jayden Daniels to Terry McLaurin.
Highest completion percentage.
No, highest passer rating.
Passer rating.
So that includes like distance covered, touchdowns,
Yeah.
the whole deal. Like there's all different things. It's a mystery formula, but like we've used it forever. But amongst players who have at least 75 targets, Jayden Daniels' 139.1 passer rating when targeting Terry McLaurin is the best in football. And so I think they do a really good job in this game of some moments where it's like, Terry's been a little quiet for a while, getting him the ball. Obviously, I think there's some times in this game where it's like, I think we probably should run Jayden here. And, I know that there's some of the specifics in the design that weren't your favorite. I like that Cliff was trying stuff. I'm a try stuff guy. That's just me. But I think as this game went on, the structure and how they got certain guys the ball, some of the things they kept coming back to, some of the RPO game, especially with the bubble screens, getting some success out on the edge. Like they found ways to move the ball against the best defense in the league. And I think the other thing that they did that I really love from like a structure, it was jab, 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 haymaker, jab, 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 haymaker. We know the ones that they hit, and we talked about some of the deep shots that Jayden hit already, but there's a couple other more that they miss, and that willingness to take those shots, to throw those big punches, I think really ultimately is why they're able to overcome 5 turnovers to score 36 points.
Yeah, I think that's a huge element. And also, we'll talk about this more in a second, but just how inefficient Philadelphia's offense was, specifically in the second half, about scoring touchdowns. I think they kicked 2 field goals or whatever. And obviously that anytime you're not scoring touchdowns, you let the other team, you give them an opportunity to kind of lap you, so to speak. So, but yeah, just in terms of the stuff you were talking about at the beginning of that with the offense, I love how Cliff called the game. Again, the red zone stuff was excellent. Like I love the kind of little bubble. It's like a fake bubble screen to Jamison Crowder. Because again, one of the things about when you're playing a match coverage and you're crossing people across each other. So on that play, they've got 2 people running basically posts. They've got a back to the flat. There's a little bit of hesitation, but those 3 defenders over those 3 offensive players have to communicate that pass. And you could tell that Chauncey Gardner-Johnson doesn't get the communication from Cooper DeJean that they're switching. Cooper DeJean's going to take the back. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's got to take Crowder on the post, and they drop it. And that is a well-engineered, well-designed play. I think the one to OZ is also very good in terms of like it's a guy fast to the flat, and the outside player is running like a 5-yard in, and then OZ is running a corner. And so what you're doing there is you're basically saying these 3 guys have these 3 players. We're going to stress rules. So the second I send someone to the flat, the guy who's covering the out now has to take the flat. The guy on the corner now has to take the in, and the safety has to take the corner, who's now in the and the safety is inside leverage on the corner because he's playing the in if number 1 were to go in right now. And again, it was just a really it's not an overly complicated thing, but in terms of just breaking rules and being like, hey, are you guys at home here in terms of your match coverage? No, there's going to be a dude wide open in the back of the end zone. Couple that with the fact that the offensive line, again, they had their struggles in this game, but in some kind of big drop back pass moments, we're able to give you a good pocket. Like on that one, that doesn't really get there. If Jayden Daniels can't extend the play, Biotish and Cosme are going to war with Jalen Carter on that play. Jalen Carter gets out. It takes the play from probably 2.3 seconds to 2.7 seconds. It's enough for the corner to come open, and Jayden delivers the ball there for a big play. And so really, really enjoyed both of those designs and in terms of what they were going to get from Philadelphia. Like they're going to get match. They're not going to play straight man. And we're going to just break your match with some of these concepts. And just so when you're calling them, the down and distance to call them, I thought were all were very, very smart plays.
I thought there was another really good example in the game of just Cliff being and the offensive staff being on top of what Philly did. I texted this to you. It didn't seem like there was really rhyme or reason to how Philly was matching personnel in this game. So sometimes to 12 personnel, they'd play base. Sometimes to 12 personnel, they play nickel. And we've seen that from other teams this year where they basically just treat Zach Ertz like a wide receiver, right? And so if it's against 11 personnel or 12 personnel, but Zach Ertz is one of the two tight ends, then the other team will just stay with their nickel personnel and treat Zach like a wide receiver. Well, Philly just I as the game went on, I was like, oh, this feels situational. I think like third and medium, they just like dime in some of their coverage calls, some of their blitz packages. And actually, Washington did that as well at a couple points defensively in this game, which is not something I remember seeing a ton from Joe Witt this year, but I'm sure it's happened in some other games. Well, knowing that Philly plays dime, so 6 defensive backs, 4 corners, 2 safeties on the field, there's like a 3rd and 6 where, and remember, the run game's been terrible. They run the football. They catch them in dime, and I think it's Jeremy McNichols is able to squirt for a first down on like a 3rd and 4. And so being prepared for those moments, and whether it's the coverage match rules and knowing in this situation they're going to run this, they might have this personnel grouping on the field and we can take advantage of it. Cliff and the offensive staff, to me, Logan, was so on top of the situations, especially third downs, especially red zone in this game, and on top of, and even like the explosive play to Diami out of their own end zone. That's a situational play. Like your own red, being backed up in your own end zone, that is not your between the 20s football. Like teams have tendencies there. And so they were able to take advantage of that and hit the big 51-yarder and get that drive going, get out of their own end. So I think situationally, especially considering the first time Cliff felt very unprepared on that short week and they had way too much in, they didn't own anything. Like that's kind of how he described it. To have this the second time around against Philly, I think that makes me feel really, really good about this staff and how prepared they are.
Yeah, and I think we even talked about some of the incompletions early, because of the pressure and because of kind of how the rush was kind of affecting Jayden Daniels. Like there's dudes open in a way that they weren't open in the first game, and Jayden was seeing it in a way that he wasn't seeing in the first game. So even that deserves quite a bit of credit. And I don't know if this was an adjustment or if this was something Zach did on the spot, but there's a completion to Zach Ertz, I want to say on their second to last drive of the game, where they've basically been running a lot of sail concept. They've been running like a corner, then some type of flat, and then some type of post or clear to the outside. And Philly's just done a knockout, bang out job of rallying to the underneath stuff. The safety's cutting the corner, and there's just not a lot of air there. And so Jayden a couple times has hit the back coming out of the backfield for a completion or whatever. This one, and Zach does such a good job of like being friendly, and you're like, so maybe they can get there. But on this one play, Zach runs up, he acts like he's running the corner and literally just runs a stop, just stops right there in the middle of the field. Yep. And Jayden delivers a strike. And so to me, and I don't know if that's a Cliff thing or if that's a Jayden and Zach thing, but understanding that this is the coverage you're getting to this sail concept, and we can run this stop and get a nice 12-yard completion. I really like that. And again, there were moments like that throughout. The trap was another one. The quarterback trap was one that I really liked. We've seen teams, I remember the Chicago game last year, when teams are in 3rd and 7 plus, they tend to get into 2-3 techniques. So really wide. So there's no one covering the center. And so this is 3rd and 7. It's a perfect opportunity to run trap. And so you run trap, you get a nice back block, and you kick that guy out. And there's a huge crease, and the linebackers are getting depth because that's what Philly does on 3rd down. And Jayden does a great job of maximizing it. And so there were a lot of, I think, really well-designed plays, really well-coached plays from a pass game standpoint and from a situational football standpoint that I'm really glad that you brought up there.
So go back to that sit to Ertz too, because I want to give you some credit, sir. What's the big thing you said to try to take advantage of on our previous show? Can you get DeJean and Bond just flying out to the flat, create a little space in behind them? And on that play, Chris Rodriguez runs out to the flat, and Zach Bond goes screaming out there with him. And Zach's able to sit in right behind it, and they're able to get that conversion. And then the next play is the it's funny because that's the touchdown OZ where they had too many men on the field, and
Yeah.
I was charting the personnel for the offense, the defense on every snap, and so it's 11 personnel, and then I just put LOL personnel because there's too many dudes. How do I characterize 12 players?
personnel is
You just
this?
LOL
Yeah.
personnel. And by the way, on that play, Chris Rodriguez one-on-one blocks Josh Sweat.
And I thought, oh, he's chipping in the game. I thought that. And then I went back and watched. It's a full slide.
Boom.
They slid away
Yeah.
from him. And I was like, I don't know how we got to this as a good matchup for us, but great job, Chris. You know what I mean? Like, great. Like, and it's not perfect, but it gives them enough time to vacate and see this throw. And I just was like, man, I don't know if I'm putting that in every single week, but whatever they saw, whatever Chris said, like that worked out well and it ended up being an explosive play. So again, like there was a lot of fun stuff in this game from a schematic standpoint. Again, there was a little bit of an execution, and that's the thing is like we're nitpicking execution, but this is good defense, and the windows are small, the run lanes are tight. I will say there was some run game stuff, which would be interesting to talk to some people about. I don't know if you want to double click on that.
Well, no, that was going to say, I feel like if we get through this entire offensive film review and we talk for 45 minutes about the offense, we don't acknowledge that the run game with the design running back runs was absolute booty in this game, then we probably have not done our jobs, especially for a team that's been awesome running the football all year. And 2 weeks ago against the Tennessee Titans ran for 250 yards. So I know it's the Eagles. I know it's hard, but what happened?
Yeah, so I think it's multifactorial, obviously. So the first thing is like you have to acknowledge is the personnel, which we did. Jordan Davis, I think we talked about on that first 4th and 1, like just absolutely murders people. Jalen Carter is special. Milton Williams has been special this year for them, and then Zach Bond and
Jacoby
number 17 do a great job of getting downhill and fitting runs. So that's one element. There's also an element of like some of the ways that they targeted some of their zone read stuff, and targets are funny with run games, right? So let's just kind of, usually let's say you got 5 offensive linemen and they have 6 people in the box. You have to kind of be creative about how you're going to block that guy. So one ways that the commander do it is they read one of the defensive ends. Let's say we're reading the defensive end on the left. How are we going to target this run to block the 2 linebackers, right? Because if the linebackers are pushed to our right, it's easy. The double teams can sink. We can push across the ball. We can really sit our double teams and create horizontal displacement, which is really effective. For whatever reason, and I think it's probably because of the zone read, the 2 linebackers that Philly played would line up. One of them would line up really to the offensive left, to the zone read side, and the other one would line up basically over the center. So you can't really take those double teams anywhere. So that's a huge thing, is that the second those guys step up, the double teams are basically dead, and there's no way to create the movement you need to, right? Because of how we coach our zone read. We coach the zone read really downhill into the line of scrimmage as opposed to across the ball. So there are a couple things like that where you're like, technically, this is really hard for the guys to execute, and there's not a lot of answers in this. So that's one thing. And then
real quick, Logan, just something that we might be taking for granted. Like the way a double team works in the run game is you have 2 offensive linemen, one of which has a good angle and one of which has a bad angle. Typically, like if you were to try to one-on-one that guy, they will go. So let's say it's a defensive tackle, the center, and the guard, and you're running to the left, and so it's the center and the left guard. The left guard has a really good angle to seal off and create like a wall, the old Vince Lombardi. We got a seal here and a seal there, right? You get the seal to that side. If you're just running straight, okay, cool. The center would also be able to get to the other defensive tackle to his right. But you need someone to be able to block the linebacker. So what happens is the center and the guard, let's say, double team the defensive tackle long enough for the center to overcome his alignment disadvantage, get that seal, and then the left guard releases up to the linebacker. Because of where the linebackers are, what you're saying is that's basically impossible. They've already beaten the angle, and you're not like, unless the left guard in this case were to just sprint off the ball to the second level, he's got no chance. But then the center has no chance on the first guy, and that second guy doesn't matter. Just felt like that was probably worth double clicking.
No, that's exactly right. It's just basically like the positions, right, of the linebackers in relation to the defensive linemen. That's all it is, right? It's just it's like geometry, basically. Like,
but it's also why you can't just be like, well, then send someone up there. It's like, well, then the first guy's screwed. So it's hard.
Yeah, it is really hard. And that happened a couple times in this game. And it just, when you're playing defensive tackles as good as these guys are, the double teams need to be really crisp and they need to be and you need to make sure you ensure good angles. And so that would be a conversation to have with maybe Anthony Lynn or Cliff about how do we ensure our run targets ensure good double teams. And that can be hard. And that was something that, when I was with Kyle in San Francisco and Mike McDaniels was the run game coordinator, he was insane, quite frankly, about finding those good angles, because especially against a team like this, you understand how important it is. The problem with ensuring good double team angles is sometimes there's an unblocked player like to the hole of the run or to the backside of the run, which you're kind of asking the running back to run off of. And so again, like it's kind of, stealing from Peter to pay Paul type of deal. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. And there's different philosophies and different approaches to get there. The other thing is I felt like the backs a couple times had not clean runs, but if they keep it a little bit tighter, they help the offensive lineman out as opposed to trying to bounce or cut back right away. You're really, with linebackers as fast as these guys, you need to make sure that you are helping to set the double teams. And that's where it's the targets, it's the running back supporting the linemen in terms of getting to their assignments. And then also it's just making sure you have good one-on-one matchups. And that's one where I thought perhaps they could have gotten to more trap, more wham earlier in the game. But again, they didn't have a lot of run volume the way they had versus Tennessee. So I think it's harder to kind of stack runs in that same way.
Yeah. There's one really good example in this game that I remember. I think this is the play, 9:14 to go. This would have been the second quarter, 2nd and 7. It's 2 plays after the Diami 51-yarder, and Chris Rodriguez has a really nice 6-yard run on wham, and he presses the front side really nicely, sets up the blocks, cuts back. So if anyone's looking for an example of how to do that well, that's one that immediately pops to mind.
And that was excellent. And then the very next run that he has, it's kind of that Wando where they're leading the receiver back to block the safety there. And again, that's an example of a way to create good angles in the run game, right? Because we're blocking the support player, the offensive line can push to the front side. Nakobe Dean's still pushed to the side of the run a little bit. Chris should be right downhill. He gets downhill and then he starts, I got this. I got to cut it. I can bounce it outside because he sees the receiver. But when he does that, the linebacker scrapes over the top. And that's exactly what you don't want on Wanda. You want to press in there, force the linebackers to attack the double team, right? And then they stick to the offensive lineman, and then you make the cut. So like that's where it's a subtle thing where the back's got to help the O-line, the scheme has to help the O-line, the types of plays you're calling has to help the offensive line. And that's why a really well-engineered, really well-cultivated run game is such a beautiful thing to watch, like it was versus Tennessee, because everybody is doing what they're supposed to do. The receivers are blocking. The O-linemen know the double teams and how much time they have. And this game, again, because of how fast, I think partially because of how fast the linebackers are, because of how good the defensive tackles are, it just becomes really hard. And so I think I really do believe they'll have much more success versus Atlanta, for example.
For sure. Saquon had a beautiful cutback on Wanda. That was exactly the thing Bobby literally gets turned around. Like he does a 360 while he's getting blocked because he thinks Saquon's going one way because he presses so far into the hole and then cut back outside. But we'll talk about him more in a second. Anything else about the offense, structurally, the design, the play calling? We talked about the red zone stuff, how intricate that was. We talked a little bit about like that switch release on the game winner and how that put Zach Bond on Jamison Crowder. Like the details were so good. Anything else that we want to touch on?
No, I think we kind of touched on everything we wanted to touch on there. I think it was a fun game. I think this is the one thing I want to say is the turnovers, right? We just got to be better managing the football. And I know that's anybody watching the game probably had that same thought, but that's something we definitely need to, or the team needs to reinforce, be aware of, because you can't beat teams turning the ball over that many times.
For sure. And they haven't really lost. I mean, that's B-Rob's first 2 fumbles of the season, and he lost them.
Yeah.
The Diami play is just an incredible play by Zach Bond that's damn near an incompletion because he's on it so fast. But Diami just gets, makes a football move, and then thus it's a fumble. And obviously, Jayden, one's just a bad throw, and then one's a very silly decision that should have cost them the game. Alas, it did not, and thank goodness we move forward with another win on the board. Let's talk about the defense and how they were able to stop the bleeding to give the offense a chance in the first place.